Hello everyone, this is part 35 of What If Naruto Got Lost During His Training TS, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe. The speed freaks were then deployed, and were harassed by the gliders, but due to their having shields protecting them, casualties were lessened significantly. The defenders were unable to land any more solid hits. The walls stood firm under the ant bite-like fire that the speed freaks were employing. No matter what the defenders did, they were unable to do any more damage to the attackers. The mounted cannons commenced firing once they realized that the gliders were no longer doing any more damage. Try as they might, they were unable to even dent the boats that were speeding here and there all across the aquatic battlefield. They started the battle as the winning side, and ended up defending themselves like mad. The best defense is a great offense, and the defenders no longer able to employ such a tactic. The invaders were starting to do a better job of it. Then they had to defend against the raining balls of cannon fire coming from the second line of ships. The long-ranged artillery doing massive damage to the wall, as well as the morale of the enemy. There wasn't rice field officers scrambling to turn the tide back in their favor. The days went by in slow succession, the tide of battle traded from one side to the other, neither having a firm hold on the title of the winning side. There were hits and misses, but eventually after exhausting half of the supplies, the Rosuto forces were able to shatter the first defensive wall. Before the ships made their advance, after learning from the error of their first attack, Tsukiko had all the mages erect shields on all the ship, no more scouting parties were needed, or would be sent out, the Croc Corps had lost too many valuable members as it were. Once the fleet was substantially protected by shielding, the fleet moved onwards, and inwards. They took the place of the first wall, within striking distance of the second wall. Form ranks and fire at will. Yoshiko shouted over the PA system to all the ships. Once the ships had all formed ranks, their shields powered to the max, and the shells having been set into the barrels, all ships were ordered to hold their fire, as some of the frontliners noticed that the second wall was evolving. From a wall simply made with a heavy dose of chakra-enforced wood and some sand, the second wall gained an additional shell, this one made of metal, and some rocks here and there. Orochimaru had deployed another one of his experiments. These people had the power to simply create metal out of the earth around them. The manipulation of the earth was refined enough that they were able to coat the wall in an additional shell, of chakra-enforced and enhanced metal. The gliders were taken out of the skies, and the launchers formed ranks on the wall, ready to overturn any approaching boats by hitting the water underneath with explosive kunai, and other such things. Second row, count of 1 to 6, Tsukiko ordered over the radio, every number 1 power up using fire, 2 water, 3 earth, 4 wind, 5 lightning, and 6 neutral. Hi, was heard over the radio. We need to see the strengths and weaknesses of that wall, do it stat. Yoshiko added, 1 round, 1 start, 10-minute intervals between elements. Begin. The officers could be heard from the ship's radios. After the number 1 ships fire their fire elemental chakra-powered shells at the wall, there was no visible damage. Assessment. Tsukiko called out through the radio to the frontliners. Heat levels have simply skyrocketed in the areas hit, rapidly cooling due to the people on the other side, an officer radioed in. The second set of shells were launched and hit the next to the first indentations. The water had a cooling effect, but somehow some of the gunners had added a freezing effect to their shells. Assessment, came Tsukiko's voice over the radio. Some parts are visibly falling off, the hot and cold areas that are touching are looking to be a little bit fragile, an officer observed. Then the third round was fired, the resulting damage was simply some deeper indentations on the wall, normal damage was dealt to the wall, nothing more, nothing less. Tsukiko was cut off. What a regular shell would do to any old wall, the officer reported in. The fourth set of shells SD cleanly through some parts of the wall, but were sealed up quickly by the metal users inside. The damage could be great, but due to the speed of the repairs, it would be a waste of valuable ammunition. The fifth set of shells did not visibly affect the metal shell surrounding the wooden wall. But on the wall, some of the Rosuto forces could visibly see that some of the soldiers had been put to sleep due to the electric shock delivered by the lightning-enhanced shells. Hold fire number 6s. Tsukiko ordered, aim for the areas where the hot and cold touch. The regular shells hit their targets spot on, the resulting damage were scars on the wall, the inner wooden wall had been exposed for some reason. In those places the metal users were unable to repair the damage as quickly as when the wind-powered shells hit. Alternate between lightning, fire, water, and regular shells, Tsukiko ordered, when the wood is exposed some cease the lightning and water on those areas. You have your orders, commence the attack, Yoshiko announced. The bombardment of the second wall lasted for 2 whole months before the metal shell had been destroyed completely. It was thicker in some places and thinner in others. Behind the thicker places, once exposed were holes already in the wall. There the Rosuto forces found some caches of weaponry, weapons that lost their use when the regular and fire shells hit them. The explosions helped the Rosuto forces, while at the same time caused the metal and wood users to construct defensive barriers behind the exposed areas instead of reinforcing the second wall. The walls behind the second wall were created to hinder that invading foes from moving further, and causing more damage to the camps behind the second wall. The destruction of the second wall cost the Rosuto forces 1/4 of their supplies in ammunition. While they were able to conserve on food and water due to its abundance in the surrounding waters. Communication transmissions went back and forth between battle areas. Kira here, Tsukiko, do you read me? Nufu Kira said from the mirror used by his clansmen, since radios could not reach that far. Tsukiko here, what's up Kira? Tsukiko asked her comrade once her face became clear on Kira's end. How goes the battle on your front? Kira asked. He was performing a survey of all the battle fronts. The rice field forces were able to set up 3 barriers, where at the second one, it seems that the serpent was able to pull a fast one of the world. He's got more firepower than intel suggested, Tsukiko reported. I see. Will you be needing some assistance? Juashu-sama is overseeing some bases built, and the like here in the south front, Kira said. We need not resort to such a thing at this time, we're nearly through the second barrier as it is, landing will commence probably within the next month. Good to hear, well that's about it, unless you need something. We could use some more supplies, everything other than food and water is starting to run low. Affirmative, I read you loud and clear, I'll have some sent over to replenish your supplies, but it'll probably get there in about 2 to 3 months tops. That's fine, Tsukiko said, well I got a battle to oversee, Tokage clan over and out. Talk to you later Tokage Dono. Once the second wall had been shattered to smithereens, the rice field forces knew when to retreat, but they left some of their people, as SS, to hold back the impending landing of the invasion forces. By the time that the supplies arrived for the Rosuto forces, they were still locked out of the land area. Complete landing had yet to commence, but thanks to the arrival of the added ammunition, the boats were able to make short work of the defending forces. Upon landing the Rosuto forces let loose the dogs of war, or in this case the wolves of war, along with the rocks. Orochimaru had decided to break contact with the northern border, trusting them to hold that front, while he joined the high border attackers, as he believed that he needed some workout, he enlisted his protege to aid in the fighting down there. The third and last wall had no choice but to further fortify themselves, seeing as the last wall was the last line of defense against the invading army. An army that had already landed, and were busy setting up a campsite of their own. Unloading troops and supplies, while making strategies and plans on how to deal with the last obstacles in their quest of entering the country officially. The Rosuto forces decided that since the wall was inland somewhat, they would be able to use the cannons on the ships to minimal effect. Which resulted in the decision to use regular shells to add some indentations to the wall. The wall had received an upgrade, it had a double layer of metal, as well as a TSLE layer of wood. The mounted turrets were littered all over the top of it, with soldiers carrying their launchers on either side of the turrets, ready to fire on any suspicious character that made to even touch the wall. New plan, Yoshiko announced to the gathered officers, her mother leaving her in charge of the operation while she saw to the needs of the fleet. We will be using the rocks to drop some of our people on the other side of the wall. What will that accomplish? An officer questioned. By placing our people on that side, they will be vulnerable to attack, they will be looking for a frontal assault, not a backspring attack from their flank, she supplied, Once we have confirmation of a commencement of attacks from the inside, we begin scaling the wall. Our new goal is not to destroy the wall, but to get over and into the rest of the country, leaving most of the wall intact. What do you mean by most of the wall? Another officer asked. Parts of the wall, once we have taken control of it, will be converted into gates that will allow our people to get inside. Instead of being used to keep us out, we will use their wall to keep them in. We'd be caging them in further, an officer observed. Precisely, but once we do get control with the wall, we will await further instructions from command. Hi. The Rocks had one rider, but carried in its talons a speedboat that had been converted into a cargo hold, one that would, instead of just supplies, would also hold people. Once the boats were filled with people and supplies, the Rocks took to the skies, way above the clouds, and over the wall, dropping off their loads, and flying back over the walls to base camp. The boats dropping to the ground with parachutes to make sure that the descent would be slow enough. The Rocks flew over at night, to make sure that they and the precious cargo was not found out. Once the Rosuto forces had made camp on the other side of the wall, they swiftly made preparations for storming the wall. Alongside the people were the wolves, ready to bring the soldiers into the camps near the walls, ready to tear into the muscles and bones of the defenders. They were not armed with launchers or any kind of modern or advanced technology. The soldiers had opted to go in light. They had lightweight armor, leather armor mostly, along with blades, bows, and arrows, to be used in the fighting. They all knew how to use them, and they all knew what their objective was. They had their orders, all that remained to be done was to commence the actual attack. The flank of the defending forces had no sentries, no defense at all to speak of, there weren't any traps either. It seemed that they truly did not expect to be attacked from their flanks, assuming that beyond the vegetation was only rice fields and their homes. But they were wrong. Stealth was used greatly by the invaders. The wolves were an asset in that regard, as they were predators to the core. They stalked their prey, with a soldier or two on their backs, silently blending into the shadows of the night, amongst the plants and the rocks. The sky added some more cover for the invading forces, as the stars and the moon were blocked out by clouds themselves. Dark clouds filled the already dark sky. As the Rosuto forces moved ever closer to the camps, they noticed something moist land on their faces. It had started to rain. This was something that they could use to their advantage. Their enemy would not be expecting an attack in such weather, as not only rain hit them, but winds. A storm had been brewing, and it seemed that it had decided to begin. The torrential downpour, and the stormy winds, added more cover for the approaching army of invaders. The defenders that were not on the wall were retreating to their shelters in preparation for the continuation of the storm. The winds were strong enough to deter an aerial strike, and they were also strong enough to keep cannon shells at bay, not that the Rosuto forces were planning on using such things in their present course of attack. Beyond the wall, along the beach, the Rosuto camp knew that the attack on the inside was about to begin. They knew to expect something to occur, so they prepared their troops, and when all were ready they set off in the direction of the wall, leaving enough people in the camp to look like they were still there in case some scouts were sent out to observe them. Even though the Rosuto forces knew that that was not the case, it was still better to be safe than to be sorry. Each group stalked the wall camp in the night, slowly yet steadily making their way towards the goal. They prowled in the night, and even in the day, setting up the positions, the dark clouds overhead continuing to pour floodloads of rain, and the winds continued to blow ever stronger. The storm that had appeared had apparently decided to watch the that was sure to take place. Without anyone out watching the camps, the Rosuto infiltrators rushed into the camp, making their way to the tents. When all of those assigned to the tents were in place, the others, the ones left in the foliage, went about their assigned task, which was to shake the camp up, sowing a little bit of confusion and chaos into the minds of their enemy. Explosions rocked the camp. The turrets on the wall were made to face inwards instead of outward. The defenders on the wall rushed down to see what was happening in the camps. There was a need to know what had occurred. When they arrived, they were met with jaws filled with incisors. Once the turrets faced inward, the Rosuto forces on outside, the ones that had planned on scaling the wall, began their wall scaling plan. Launching grappling hooks, and pushing up ladders, they made their way onto the walls, killing the turret operators before they were noticed. They descended from the top of the wall, killing all that opposed them in the process, leaving not a single man or woman alive. When the rest of the defenders realized what was happening, it was almost too late. But what could they do? They had already been infiltrated. But due to the severity of the consequences of allowing the invaders to continue on to the rest of the beloved country, they decided that even if they were to they would be taking a lot of their enemy with them to the afterlife. The retaliation of the defenders was a vicious one. They knew that they were going to so they decided to fighting. They all entered some kind of berserker state, and just jumped into the fray, not caring how much damage they were receiving. All that mattered was that they battered the invading army. They went for attacks, while at the same time taking out a sizable chunk of the attackers. When Tsukiko and Yoshiko decided to enter the battle, they used their own blend of teamwork against the defenders. They weaved in and out of battle, taking off heads left and right, with their 4 katanas, not bothering slash or simply strike any other part of the boss of the defenders. Some of the defenders realized the importance of the 2 women, as a lot of the invaders were making sure that most of the defenders were unable to really make it difficult for the 2 women to go about seeing the defending forces. These people that noticed that importance of the 2 women strengthened their resolve to take down as much of the invading army as possible. Their main target were the 2 women. If even one of them were taken out of commission, then the invaders would lose some morale. The defenders were somehow able to signal their allies into converging on the pair of women. Attacks growing faster and stronger as each man and woman realized what their targets represented. The Rosuto forces were not too quick to notice the change in the battle atmosphere, until it was too late. The 2 women were surrounded, their protectors around them, and they were surrounded on all sides by the defending army of Rice Field Country. The 2 women, realizing that they were stranded in the midst of a hell of a lot of the defenders, defended each other as best as they could, which was saying a lot considering that they were vastly outnumbered. Katanas flashing in the light of the lightning, heads rolled or flew off of shoulders. Still the defenders advanced, brandishing their weapons, and blindly attacking, not caring if they all that mattered was that they take the lives of the 2 women that were fighting for the very lives against the odds. The Rosuto mages were the last to go over the wall. They were also the last to enter the fray, not finding much opposition. They were also the first ones to notice their commanders being surrounded and assaulted by the defending forces. The ones closest in position to their leaders charged up the magic that they held control over, and charged up attacks which they then sent in the direction of their foes, those that would dare try and harm the Rosuto royal family. Some of the other mages notified the rest of the ground forces on what they was occurring. This news made the invaders themselves grow bloodthirsty. When the battle first began, they were simply following orders, as well as believing in the cause of their superiors and rulers. But now, due to the decision of their enemies, they found a reason to become more violent. No one singled out the royals of Rosuto no Kuni at any time and at any place that a Rosuto citizen was also present in. The defenders realized too late that their strategy had in some way backfired on them, but even though they knew that their time was almost up, and that they would not be able to really take out a considerable number of their foes, they knew that they still had a chance of CSPing their enemy by taking out the 2 important women that were surrounded by them. No matter how many heads were separated from boss, they just kept coming. It was as if the sea had turned into people and had decided to try and swallow them up in the waves, send them underwater, and drown them painfully. Tsukiko and Yoshiko were finding it harder and harder to keep fighting, when they were not allowed any form of rest from the constant attacking and defending that they had to continuously perform. They were battling for their life, but such was war, an experience that they had thought that they had long forgotten. It had been roughly 1,000 years since they had experienced such a battle. The warriors of this new age did not seem to have what it took to be a match for the war veterans of 1,000 years ago. But it seemed like they 2 women just had the bad luck of finding an entire nest of the beastras. They concentrated on defending one another. When one decapitated a soldier, the other defended from any attacks. All 4 blades moved as one, but they did not know for how much longer they would be able to keep up their attack and defend tandem. The mages positioned on the wall were doing all they could, but it seemed as if there were just too many defenders converging on that one spot. They may have been concentrated, but he magic SD out every 20 people or so, and there were still a few hundred more. The invaders, try as they might, could not go any closer to their leaders without losing a limb or a life, each case being a terrible loss to the army. It also greatly lowered morale a lot. The invaders were losing, and they didn't know how long they had been fighting. The storm hadn't let up, and it was chaos. Left, RGHT, and center, lives were being lost, on all sides of the conflict. Who knew that the rice field troops could be so ferocious in battle? The Otonins, remembering what they were, turned the tide of victory in favor of rice field country, when they started using ninjutsu on the invaders. Elemental jutsu were being flung here and there. Fire and all the rest were being used to down scores upon scores of Rosuto troops. The mages were being forcefully thinned out, their numbers quickly dwindled with every shinobi that remembered his or her training. The mages had poor defenses against such attackers, they were long-ranged fighters, which was why they stayed away from the close combat fighters, and decided to stick to the wall as much as possible, raining down death from above. But they did not count on the Otonins to remember their training, and employ it in repelling the attackers. The Rosuto forces appeared to be losing, their chancre of winning steadily going down with each mage killed, and each platoon of troops taken out of commission. But the biggest blow was dealt when someone was finally able to kill the F of both the female commanders. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.